The sound that finally got my attention was not the phone. It was the drip under the sink. Drip. Pause. Drip again. That faint, hollow tap of water hitting the metal bowl I had shoved under there. The week before, I was standing barefoot in my grandmother's old kitchen, feeling the cool tile under my feet, a soft April breeze pushing through the open window and stirring the curtains. She had sewn herself. Light was fading outside over the maple trees in the backyard, and the whole house smelled like dish soap and the last cup of coffee I had, reheated and never finished. If you are listening to this right now, I am honestly curious what you are doing at this moment. Folding laundry, driving, maybe sitting in your own kitchen, like I was that evening. When all of this started, I was just standing there with a phone in my hand and a leaky faucet, thinking the only thing I needed from my dad was a warranty number. I wiped my wet hand on a dish towel, picked up my phone from the counter, and scrolled to his name. Dad. Not Dad in my contacts with some sweet little heart icon, just 3 plain letters. I still caught myself staring at them sometimes, wondering how a word so small could hold so much weight. I hit the call and leaned my hip against the counter while it rang. From the other room, the television murmured, some home renovation show I had turned on mostly for company. The drip kept going, steady and irritating. He answered on the 4th ring, breath a little short and a voice already edged with impatience. Yeah, what is it, Clara? Hey, I said, keeping my voice light. The kitchen sink is leaking again. I was looking for the warranty for the faucet. You installed it, remember? Do you know which folder you stuck the paperwork in? He exhaled through his nose, the sound sharp right into my ear. You always lose things, he muttered. Then louder. Try the drawer in the hall, bottom one. I think I shoved all the kitchen stuff in there. I bit back the urge to remind him that the only reason he had installed the faucet was because he did not trust a plumber not to overcharge. Thanks, I said instead. I will check. Fine. I am busy. The line went quiet, and there was a muffled rustle, like he was tucking the phone into his pocket without really thinking about it. I waited for the little click, that tiny sound you get when a call ends. It did not come. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. Call in progress, it said. I frowned a little. Maybe he would hang up in a second. In the background, I heard a car door slam, then another. The rush of traffic, the distant hum of an engine. He must have been out with my mom, maybe getting gas or stopping at the big box store by their condo. Their voices came through a little muffled at first, like they were still outside the car. Who was that? Came my mom's voice. Sylvia, sharp even through the Bluetooth distortion. Clara, my dad said, and the way he said my name made it sound heavier than it was. Always some issue with that house. I froze, still bent toward the hall, as if I was about to walk to that drawer he had told me about. The phone felt heavier in my hand. I should have said something. I should have cleared my throat, laughed it off, told them they were still on the line. Instead, I stayed very still. You know, he went on, she is such a leech, just draining us dry. My mom gave this little scoff I knew by heart. Well, what do you expect? Evelyn handed her a whole house. A whole house, Gerald. And we got what? A few little checks and a thank you for your service? That place should have been our safety net, not her private castle. My shoulders started to go cold. They were talking about my grandmother's house, the one I was standing in. The one where the wallpaper was still covered in tiny blue flowers because I could not bring myself to replace it. My chest tightened, and my breath turned shallow. My blood actually did run cold, the way people say in books, like something dropped from my head straight down my spine and settled in my stomach. She could at least help with the Maui trip, my mom went on. We raised her. We made sacrifices. We are not asking for the moon. 10 days at a resort, after all those years, is not unreasonable. There was a car door thunk, and then the sound shifted, more enclosed, more echoes, like they were both inside now, and the engine had started. My dad's voice came through clearer. I will tell you this. When we get back, I am done playing nice. That house is our retirement, whether she likes it or not. She is soft. Push her with a couple guilt trips. Talk about hospital bills. Remind her who paid for everything when she was a kid. She will sign whatever we put in front of her. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles went white. I put my free hand flat against the counter just to steady myself. The drip under the sink kept going, stupid and steady. Drip. 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 My mom laughed a little, almost fond, like she was reminiscing about a silly child. She has always been weak, Gerald. Always. You saw how she folded when we said we were stressed about money last year. If we had pushed a little harder, we might already have our names on that deed. I could hear them shifting, seatbelts clicking. My dad chuckled, low and satisfied. When we come back from Maui, I am sitting her down and getting those papers signed. She owes us. That house belongs to this family, not just to her. One little signature. She will not fight it. She never fights anything. My heartbeat thudded so loud in my ears that for a second I could not hear them at all. The kitchen around me lost focus, the edges of the room blurring. They were planning this, not vaguely wishing, not making bitter comments like they had at Christmas. They were laying out a step-by-step plan to strip the only thing in my life that was fully mine. The only thing my grandmother had trusted me with. I realized my mouth had gone completely dry. My first instinct was still the one I had been trained into since childhood. Make a joke. Smooth it over. Call back and say, "Hey guys, you did not hang up. I heard you complaining. It is fine. I know you were just stressed." But the words would not move. I stayed silent. "You know she will help with the trip if we phrase it right," my mom was saying. "She hates conflict. Say something about how all the cousins are doing better than us, about how we do not get to enjoy life. She eats that stuff up. Guilt has always worked on her." "Exactly," my dad agreed. "She is a leech who thinks she is independent. Meanwhile, she is living in a house that should have been ours all along." The word hit me like a slap. Leech. I could see the letters in my mind. Not my daughter. Not a helper. Not even disappointment. A parasite. In that moment, something quiet inside me, something that had always bent and bent and bent around their moods, stopped moving. My thumb hovered over the red button on my screen. I could have hung up 10 times already, but there was a part of me that needed to hear every drop of poison, every little strategy, all of it laid out in their own voices, so that later, when I started to doubt myself like I always did, I would not be able to pretend I had imagined it. They kept talking. My mom suggested selling some of my furniture once they took the house, replacing it with their old recliners, and the china cabinet they had never stopped grieving. My dad made a casual comment about how, if I could afford to keep the place going on a realtor's commission, I could certainly afford to float them for 10 days in Hawaii. She is single, no kids, he said. What else is she going to do with her money? She owes us at least that much. Finally, my thumb pressed down. The call screen shrank away, and my reflection stared back at me from the darkened glass of the phone. I looked oddly calm. The house around me was very quiet. The television in the living room had moved on to a commercial break. A cheerful voice advertising cleaning products, oblivious to the little storm that had just passed through my kitchen. Outside, a dog barked down the block. The faucet dripped. I set the phone on the counter very carefully and straightened up. My legs felt a little unsteady, like I had been on a rocking boat. This house had always felt like the one solid thing in my life. My grandmother had bought it in the 70s, paid it off early, repainted it herself whenever the mood struck. When she left it to me, it was not just a roof and 4 walls. It was a statement, an act of faith. She had watched the way my parents treated money and treated me, and in her quiet way, she had tried to cut a channel through all of that. I turned slowly, taking it in. The outdated cabinets my grandmother refused to replace because she said the new styles looked like hospital furniture. The little dent in the refrigerator door where I had bumped it with a moving box the day I moved in. The framed cross-stitch by the pantry that said in careful letters, "Be kind, but do not let them walk on you." $980,000. That was what the last appraisal had said the place was worth. To my parents, that was all they saw now. A number with a lot of zeros behind it. A retirement plan. An answer to every bad decision they had ever made. To me, standing there with my heart still pounding from words they had never meant me, to hear, it was something else entirely. If you have ever found out what your family really thought about you, when? They thought you were not listening. You know that feeling, that hollow drop in your chest, the rush of shame that is not even yours, the confusion about how long it has really been like this. I would not wish that moment on anyone. And if you have lived something like it, I hope you know you can tell someone, even if it is just in a comment somewhere under a story like this, because you are not as alone as you think. I reached out and ran my fingers along the edge of the counter, following the little chips in the laminate where my grandmother used to bang. Pots down. My breathing slowed. The first wave of shock gave way to something else, a quieter, cooler feeling, almost like a deep body of water settling after a stone has been thrown in. And the ripples have finally reached the shore. If they think I am a leech, I heard myself say out loud, my voice low in the empty kitchen, then they have no idea what this leech can do. The drip under the sink went on, steady and patient. I picked up the phone again, but did not call them back. I set it face down on the counter and just stood there in the quiet kitchen, letting the weight of what I had just heard settle into my bones. My breathing had slowed, but my hands were still trembling a little. I pressed my palms flat against the cool countertop, grounding myself the way my grandmother had taught me. She used to say that when life knocked the wind out of you, find something steady to touch and remember who you are. For a long moment, I simply stood there. The house felt so still, it was almost like it was listening with me. Every memory in the walls seemed to stir. The drifting echo of my grandmother humming while making her morning tea. The creak of the old oak floors when she shuffled in her slippers toward the screen door. The warmth she carried with her everywhere she went. It made the words I had heard from my parents feel even more bitter. As the shock eased, something else rose up through it, something older and heavier. A memory I had tried to bury so many times. I could see myself at 15, standing in our cramped living room while my dad waved my first paycheck in my face. Back then, I had worked after school at a little burger place on West Broad Street, saving every penny I could because I dreamed of going to college somewhere far from home. Somewhere quiet where nobody yelled. I remember handing him that check, proud because it felt like the first step toward freedom. He took it, glanced at the number, and said I should be grateful he was letting me keep $20 of it. The rest, he said, was for the household, since I lived under their roof. My mom had sat on the couch with a heating pad tucked behind her back. She always had some ailment, some pain, some crisis that needed my help. She said that college was a nice idea, but she reminded me that she had sacrificed everything for me. My dad added that if I were a better daughter, I would understand. Then he put my paycheck in his wallet. I watched it disappear, as if the future I wanted went with it. It did not stop there. By the time I was 18, I had saved up a small college fund in a separate account to my grandmother, helped me open. It was nothing big, but it was mine. One afternoon, just a few months before graduation, I walked into the kitchen to find my dad sitting at the table with a pile of bank papers spread out. He told me calmly that he had moved the savings into a joint household account. He said families share everything, and that he had bills to cover. I remember barely hearing the rest. The sound in my ears had faded to a dull roar. That was the day I learned that independence was something my parents never intended to let me have. I pushed the memory aside and walked toward the dining room, where the evening sun was sliding across the hardwood floors. I needed the light. I needed the reminder that my life was not all shadows. My grandmother made sure of that. I closed my eyes and let myself drift back to the weekends I spent at her house. I used to wait by the front window every Friday afternoon until I saw her old, teal sedan pull into our driveway. She would step out wearing one of her soft cardigans and that cheerful smile she always saved just for me. I would grab my little overnight bag and run to her. She would say something like, "There's my sunshine," and everything in me loosened. Her house had smelled like cinnamon and laundry soap. She never raised her voice. She listened to me like my words mattered. She taught me how to make homemade soup, how to sew a button, how to read bills and understand interest so no one could trick me. She showed me how to set a budget by slipping cash into labeled envelopes. She said that power was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet and steady and built piece by piece. She always told me never to let anyone take from me what I had worked so hard to build. When she died at 2021, the grief sat on my chest for months. My parents got a small inheritance that they burned through in less than 3 weeks. A television, a new boat rental membership, a weekend getaway, and it was gone. They did not even seem embarrassed by how fast they spent it. When the probate attorney called to say that my grandmother had left the house, to me, my mom said generously of her under her breath, in a tone that made the back of my neck prickle. Before long, they began talking about how families share space and how it was only natural that they stay with me for a while. A while turned into months. Then the months blurred into years. They treated the house like a storage unit for their old furniture. My dad dragged in a massive recliner that smelled like cigarettes. My mom replaced my grandmother's framed landscape painting with her own faux lavender canvas from a discount store. They talked loudly late at night, made piles of clutter, and complained that the place was too small for 3 adults. They had no rent contributions, no grocery contributions, no electricity contributions. But they had opinions about everything. I walked back into the kitchen and opened the bottom drawer in the hall, more out of habit than intention. It was packed with old appliance brochures and loose screws. I sifted through it, not for the warranty paper anymore, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Under a stack of old dish towels was a small box labeled keepsakes in my grandmother's handwriting. My breath caught. I did not remember putting it there. I carried it back to the kitchen table, sat down slowly, and opened the lid. Inside were a few of her old recipe cards, a photo of us sitting on her porch steps when I was 10, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was shaky, the ink a little faded. My throat tightened. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it. The letter was short. My grandmother had never been one for long speeches. She wrote that if I was reading the letter, then something she had feared must have happened. She wrote that she trusted me, that she left the house to me for a reason, and that I was stronger than I believed. She said that love that hurts is not love, and that I should never let guilt trap me in a place I do not belong. The last line read, "If you are reading this, my fear has become your burden." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. There was a deep ache in my ribs, the kind that comes when you finally stop pretending something is not hurting you. I sat there for a long time, with the late afternoon air turning cooler around me. The refrigerator hummed. The drip under the sink had slowed a little, like even the faucet was trying to give me space. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. I put the box of keepsakes to the side, close enough to reach again if I needed to feel her with me. Then I stood and walked to the living room. I sat down on the old couch my grandmother had reupholstered years ago in a soft cream fabric. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. My parents had always seen me as something to use, a resource to tap when they fell short, a soft place to land when life went wrong for them. I could see now how long that pattern had been in place. It went back to childhood and wound itself into adulthood, turning me into someone who apologized even when I was the one who was hurt. That night in my grandmother's kitchen, listening to them talk about me like I was a piece of property they planned to seize, something cracked open inside me. It hurt, but it also cleared something. The truth wiped away a kind of fog I had lived in for years. They were not going to change. They had never even tried. I pushed myself up from the couch and walked to the window. The yard outside was calm. The maple branches swayed gently. The sky had turned a pale orange, the last bit of sun stretching across the fence like a soft ribbon. My grandmother's voice came back to me then. She once told me during one of our quiet porch evenings that a person needs a home where they can think straight. And when someone threatens that place, they are threatening your future. I placed my hand against the window frame and felt the warmth of the fading light. I did not know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I could not let their plan unfold. I could not let them walk into this house and take what she had given me. The weight of that truth settled into me like a steady flame. For the first time in a long time, I felt something that was not fear, or confusion, or guilt. I felt resolve beginning to take shape. I stayed by the window until the light finally slipped away and the yard turned dark. Then I turned off the kitchen lights, carried the keepsake box upstairs, and placed it on my nightstand. I lay on the bed without changing clothes, listening to the quiet of the house, the steady hum of the ceiling fan, and the soft thump of my own heartbeat. Sleep did not come easily. My mind kept circling back to their voices, and the certainty with which they talked about taking everything from me. But each time the anger threatened to rise, the image of my grandmother's smile steadied me again. When I finally drifted off, it was with her letter beside me and one clear truth in my chest. I could not go on the way things had been. Something had to change, and it would. I woke the next morning with the faintest ache behind my eyes, the kind you get after a night of restless dreams. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in old places before the sun fully rises. I reached over to the nightstand and touched the envelope from my grandmother, feeling the texture of the paper even with my eyes still closed. It steadied me. It reminded me that the fear I carried was not imagined. It had a history, and it had a name. As I came downstairs, the morning light slanted through the kitchen blinds in thin stripes. I made coffee and stood there with both hands wrapped around the warm mug, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and that same slow drip under the store sink that had started everything the night before. I felt different today. Not stronger exactly, but clearer, as if someone had wiped a fogged mirror, and I was finally seeing myself, without all the guilt my parents had painted over me for years. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, expecting an update from a client or a spam text reminding me of some extended car warranty. Instead, it was a message from my neighbor, Coral Henderson. She lived 2 houses down and was one of those women who carried her age with grace, always wearing light cardigans and soft jeans, gardening gloves hanging out of her back pocket. She had known my grandmother for decades. Her message was simple. "If you have a few minutes today, I have something I think you should know." My stomach dipped. I replied that I could walk over in a bit. I finished my coffee, grabbed a light jacket, and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, carrying that early spring scent of damp soil and budding trees. Coral was already on her porch with 2 rocking chairs pulled close together. She waved me over with her warm smile, but when I got close, I could see a shadow of something serious in her eyes. She reached for my hand as soon as I sat down. Her grip was soft but steady. She said that she had been thinking about my grandmother a lot lately, and that she had debated for years whether to tell me something. Then she said she had heard raised voices at my parents' place last night when they were leaving for their vacation, and it troubled her. I felt my pulse start to gather speed. Coral looked at me carefully. She said she remembered a day in late 2019, a few months before my grandmother's health started to decline. She had been bringing over a jar of blackberry jam she had made and noticed my parents' car already in the driveway. She stepped inside without knocking because my grandmother never minded. My parents were in the back hallway, near the bedrooms, and they jumped when they saw her. She said they claimed they were helping pack old clothing for donation, but she remembered clearly that they had been digging through my grandmother's personal drawers, the ones she kept locked when she left home. I felt the breath leave my chest. Coral continued. She said that later that evening, my grandmother had stopped by her house. She seemed unsettled and told Coral that she worried my parents were trying to find her will. She suspected they might try to get her to change it. Coral said she reassured her and told her to keep the documents safe. My grandmother told her she already had. I pressed a hand over my mouth, the porch boards beneath my feet seeming to tilt just slightly. I could picture my grandmother's hands, those capable hands that had fixed my clothes, folded laundry, planted flowers. I imagined them trembling with worry. Coral squeezed my arm. She said she had always admired my grandmother's backbone and that she knew she left the house to me for a reason. She added quietly that she thought I should be careful now. My parents had always been strong-willed, but something in their behavior lately reminded her of that earlier incident. I thanked her and tried to keep my voice steady. We talked for a few more minutes about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, the rose bushes she hoped to prune soon, but my mind had already drifted far from her porch. I felt the truth settling in deeper. My parents had been circling the house long before my grandmother passed. They had been waiting for an opportunity, and they believed they finally had one. When I got back home, I walked inside and closed the door behind me. I leaned against it for a moment, exhaling slowly. My grandmother's letter now felt heavier than ever. The memories of the last 2 years, the years my parents had lived with me, began to replay in my head in ways I had never fully examined. It started with little things. My dad brought his old plaid recliner into the living room and set it right, where my grandmother's antique armchair used to sit. He said his back hurt, and he needed something supportive. Soon his shoes were everywhere, his tools were stacked on the dining table, and his beer cans rattled the recycling bin every night. My mom filled the house with her fragrant sprays and left her half-eaten snacks on the counter, blaming her nerves. She always insisted she could not sleep, could not think, could not relax unless I rearranged something, bought something, or catered to some new discomfort. She complained about the paint colors, the lighting, the layout, and the fact that the old furnace was too loud for her to rest. They had offered nothing toward bills. Every month, I paid for the roof, the groceries, the utilities, the repairs, and they acted like the house belonged to all three of us equally. My dad occasionally made comments in front of family members about how nice it was that the house stayed in the family. When I tried to correct him and say gently that the deed was in my name, he brushed it off and said a house like this was too big a responsibility for one person, anyway. I remember one evening vividly. I had just come home from showing properties all day, tired and sweaty, and he was sitting in that massive recliner with the television volume turned up so loud it shook the floors. I asked him if he could turn it down a bit. He barely looked at me and said, "This place will be our retirement home someday, so you might want to get used to sharing." It had felt like a joke at the time, or something close to one, but now I knew he meant every word. A few days after Coral spoke with me, I had to go into the office at Blue Harbor Realty for a client meeting. I wore a pressed blouse and carried a folder with property details I had spent hours preparing. A couple from Arizona wanted to relocate, and this deal could significantly boost my quarter's numbers. I was early, which was unusual for me, so I felt proud walking through those glass doors. The receptionist smiled at me. Everything seemed normal until I heard familiar voices near the back of the lobby. It was my parents. My dad was arguing loudly with the receptionist. My mom was wringing her hands dramatically. Her nerves were shot, and she needed my help. They both looked stressed and breathless, like they had rushed over. My dad demanded to know why I was ignoring their calls, why I was not willing to help with some unnamed financial emergency. Heart crawled up my neck. My heart hammered with embarrassment. I tried to step between them, but my client had just arrived and was watching everything unfold. I apologized to the couple and asked if they could give me a moment. Then I led my parents outside. It did not get better out there. My dad pointed a finger in my face, accusing me of abandoning them. My mom said she felt disrespected and that she could faint any moment. They complained about bills, about the Maui trip, about everything. They wanted money. They wanted attention. They wanted control. I finally managed to get them to leave after promising to talk later, which I had no intention of doing. But the damage was done. My client had walked away, telling the receptionist to cancel the appointment because they felt uncomfortable. That deal would have covered 2 months of my mortgage expenses. That afternoon, my supervisor, Dana Whitford, called me into her office. Anna was in her early 50s, the kind of woman who could command a room without raising her voice. She asked me to sit, then closed the door quietly behind her. She told me, in her calm and even tone, that my personal boundaries were unclear and that my family was affecting my performance. She said gently that if I wanted to maintain my position, I needed to keep my personal life from storming into the office. Walking out of her office felt like stepping out into cold air after being slapped. It was another moment when something inside me tightened and then reshaped itself. My parents were not just hurting my home life, they were interfering with my livelihood. That night, after I drove home with my stomach knotted and my thoughts racing, I sat at the dining table with a notebook. I clicked a pen and held it poised over the page. Then I began to write down every strange comment, every manipulative gesture, every boundary they had crossed. I listed the times they had entered my private space, the times they had caused me to miss opportunities, the moments they had dismissed my grandmother's intentions. Line by line, the truth became undeniable. I was not imagining anything. I had evidence of a pattern I had been too tired and too loyal to see clearly. When I finally set the pen down, I stared at the list. It was long. Too long. The page looked like a map of things I had tolerated, excuses I had made, and moments where I had let guilt dictate my choices. I took a slow breath and closed the notebook. Then I placed it carefully inside the drawer of the sideboard, right behind my grandmother's cross-stitch that said, "Be kind, but do not let them walk on you." The house felt quiet again, but it was a different quiet this time, more like the moment just before a storm begins to gather. The next day, after a mostly sleepless night and too much coffee, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and typed in a name I had written down months earlier and then pushed aside. I had met attorney Phoebe Archer at a closing for one of my clients. She was calm, straightforward, and had a way of explaining legal things in a way that did not make my eyes glaze over. Back then, I had taken her card and tucked it into my planner, thinking that with a paid-off house and aging parents, it might be wise to have a good property attorney in my corner someday. Someday had shown up. I found her firm online, Archer and Blake Property Law, just a few miles across town. My hand hovered over the trackpad for a second. Then I clicked on the contact button and dialed the number. The receptionist was polite. When I told her my situation in broad strokes, that I had inherited a house and had complicated family dynamics around it, she said they had an opening the next afternoon. I almost canceled twice before I even left the driveway the following day. Old habits, I guess. I had a voice in my head, my mom's voice, telling me I was making a big deal out of nothing, that families should work things out inside the family. But I also had my grandmother's handwriting in my memory, and the echo of my parents planning to take everything from me. The traffic on the drive over was light. It was one of those clear spring days in Richmond, where the sky is a pale blue, and the trees are just starting to green up. The sight of people walking dogs and sipping coffee on patios felt bizarrely normal compared to the storm inside my chest. The office was in a modest brick building with a neat little sign out front. Inside, the lobby was quiet and smelled faintly like lemon cleaner. A few framed photographs of neighborhoods and old courthouses hung on the walls. The receptionist led me back to a small conference room with a big window and a round table. She said Attorney Archer would be right in. When Phoebe walked in, she had her reading glasses perched on her head and a file folder in her hand. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a loose twist and a presence that settled them. Room, without any effort. She greeted me with a firm handshake and an easy smile, then sat down across from me. She asked me to start from the beginning. Not every emotional detail, just the facts. I told her about my grandmother, about the house, about the will, about my parents moving in after the funeral. I told her roughly how long they had lived with me and that they had never paid rent or signed any kind of agreement. Then, with my throat tightening a little, I told her about the phone call 2 nights before. I did not repeat every cruel word my parents had said, but I gave her enough. Phoebe listened quietly, taking a few notes, but mostly just watching me the way a good doctor watches a patient. When I finished, she nodded slowly. Then she began to lay it out in plain language. She told me that the deed was in my name and my name alone. That meant I owned the property fully, regardless of what my parents believed or told other people. She explained that with no written lease, no rent payments, no proof that they had contributed financially to the property, they were essentially guests. Long-term guests, but guests all the same. They did not automatically acquire rights to the house just because they slept there. I asked about tenant rights, that phrase I had heard thrown around when people talked about evictions on the news. She said that each state had its own rules, but in my situation, it would be very hard for my parents to claim they were tenants in the legal sense. They had not paid rent, had not signed anything, and had not been treated like renters. They were family members staying with me. If I chose to end that arrangement, I could, as long as I followed basic notice procedures if it came to that. She leaned forward slightly and said that emotionally it might feel complicated, but legally it was clear. The house was mine. I was under no obligation to sign anything over or to use its value to fund my parents' retirement. Hearing it put that plainly was like having someone open a window in a room that had been closed up for years. For so long, my choices around that house had felt murky, tangled up in years of guilt and obligation. To have a professional say I had the right to protect what was mine made my shoulders drop a full inch with relief. I asked her what would happen if my parents tried to claim I had tricked my weak grandmother, or that she had meant the house for them. Phoebe gave me a small, knowing smile and said they would have to prove that, and that from what I had told her about my grandmother, it did not sound like something she would have left vague. Then Phoebe did something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. She glanced down at the file folder she had brought in and said that my grandmother's name had rung a bell when she saw it on the intake form. She opened the folder and showed me a copy of a note. My grandmother had visited her office about a year before she passed. She had come in to ask about how to make sure her house went to me and stayed with me, even if my parents tried to contest it. She had asked about wording for her will, so there would be no confusion. She had told Phoebe she loved her son and daughter-in-law, but that she did not trust their financial judgment. She wanted to give me something solid, something they could not squander. It felt like the room tilted for a moment. My throat closed up and my eyes stung. I had to stare at the table for a second just to steady myself. It was one thing to know my grandmother had left me the house. It was another to learn she had deliberately taken steps to shield me from something she saw coming long before I did. I managed to ask whether my parents knew my grandmother had talked to her. Phoebe said they did not. Her obligation had been to her client. My grandmother had made things clear in her will, and the probate process had gone through without serious contest. That meant her intentions were on record. The law, in this instance, was on my side. On my side. It was such a simple phrase, but it felt new to me. We talked for a little while longer about possibilities, about what I could do if my parents escalated, about boundaries and options. Phoebe wrote a few things down in clean, neat handwriting and told me that if I wanted her to, she could represent me if anything turned ugly. She said she had handled cases with messy family dynamics before, and that this was more common than people liked to admit. When I left her office that day, the sky looked brighter than when I had gone in. Or maybe it was just that I could finally raise my head. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. She sent a photo of 2 bright floral shirts laid out on their bed, the kind people buy for vacation photos. She said they had booked a 10-day trip to Maui, that they were finally going to enjoy themselves after a lifetime of sacrifice, and that it would be nice if I could help with some of the costs because, good. Daughters do those things without being asked. Following that, there was a long message from my dad about flight prices and hotel rates and how expensive everything was, and how, since I was living for free in a paid-off house, it would only be fair for me to pitch in. The words free and fair stuck in my throat like dry bread. When I pulled into the driveway and walked toward the house, I could hear them already inside, laughing and bustling around my grandmother's old living room. There were suitcases open on the couch, colorful clothes spilling out. My mom held up a straw hat and giggled about how she was finally going to feel like one of those women in the travel magazines. My dad was scrolling through his phone, looking loudly about rental cars and luau tickets. They barely glanced at me when I walked in. My mom waved an arm and made a comment about how stressed they were getting. Everything ready, and how it would be so much easier if I could just cover the hotel bill as a thank you for all the years they had raised me. My dad made a remark about how he hoped nothing happened to the house while they were gone, since it was really their nest egg at this point. They laughed it off like it was all lighthearted, but the edge beneath their words was sharp. Maybe before that phone call, before the meeting with Phoebe, I would have tried to smooth things over. I would have insisted on paying for something, sacrificing part of my own stability to keep the peace. Instead, I nodded, smiled a little, and said I would look at my budget. My voice came out steady, almost casual. Inside, though, everything was steel. I watched them move through my grandmother's house, talk about ocean views and buffet breakfasts. They had no idea what they had already lost. They had no idea that every word from Phoebe's mouth had pushed me closer to a decision I had not let myself consider before. I went upstairs that night and stood in the doorway of my grandmother's old room, the one I had turned into a small office. I looked at the framed photo of her on the dresser, her kind eyes behind those big old glasses she refused to give up. I remembered her coming out of the lawyer's office that day, a year before. She died, telling me vaguely that she had taken care of some paperwork so I would be safe. Safe. That was what she had wanted for me. Not bound to people who saw me as a tool. Downstairs, I could hear my parents arguing cheerfully about which excursions to choose. A sunset cruise or a scenic drive. Whale watching or shopping. Their voices floated up the stairs like background noise in a life that no longer felt like mine. I sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room and opened my notebook again. I turned to a clean page. At the top, I wrote 2 words, underlined them, and stared for a long time. Get out. Then, underneath, I began a different kind of list, not of what they had done, but of what I could do. People I could call, steps I could take, resources I could move. The lines filled up slowly, and with each line, my breathing grew steadier. By the time I set the pen down, I knew this much. My parents were going to Maui for 10 days. 10 days of sunshine and cocktails and pretending they were the long-suffering heroes of their own story. When they walked out of this house to catch that flight, I would be walking out of their lives. I sat at the small desk for a long time after writing that last line in my notebook. The house was quiet in a way that felt different from any quiet I had known here before. It was not the peace of a calm evening or the comfort of being alone. It was the stillness right after a decision, when something inside you is clicked into place and there is no going back. The next morning, I woke before the sun. My parents were still asleep downstairs, but I heard a faint snore from my dad and the rustle of my mom turning in her sleep. I moved quietly through the hallway, careful not to draw their attention. I showered, dressed, and grabbed my keys. I needed to move before doubt had a chance to slip back in. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the name I had avoided using for anything personal before. Theo March. He was a colleague I trusted more than most people. He was steady, discreet, and it helped me handle a few complicated deals with clients who wanted privacy. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was groggy, like I had woken him, but when he heard the tone in my voice, he sat up fully. I could hear the sheets shifting in the background. He asked if I was okay. I said I needed his help with a private real estate matter and that it needed to be fast and quiet. He did not ask why. He just told me to meet him at the office in 30 minutes. When I arrived, he already had 2 cups of coffee sitting on the conference table. He pushed one toward me, his expression serious. I told him everything, except the details that would make him pity me. I did not want pity. I wanted movement. He listened, his face tightening in a way that told me he understood enough. He said he knew a couple looking for a property exactly like mine. Off-market, quick sale, and ready to close with cash. Their names were Gavin and Lila Porter. He had worked with Gavin before. They were relocating from Minnesota after a job shift and needed a home within 2 to 3 weeks. Theo said they were fair, responsible, and did not like drama. I almost laughed at that word. Drama. I had been living inside it for so long, it felt like a second language. He called them right there. His voice shifted into his professional tone as he gave them a brief description. I heard Lila's voice through the speaker, excited and relieved. They had been struggling to find a place that was ready. Theo told me quietly that they were prepared to offer $980,000, full cash, no contingencies, and that they could sign within days if I wanted. A tremor of disbelief passed through me. It was the exact number from my last appraisal, the exact number my parents had been discussing, like it was theirs. I felt a strange mixture of gratitude, fear, and something like vindication rise in me. Theo put the phone on mute and looked at me. "If you do this," he said softly, "it has to be today, before anything can get complicated, before anyone can try to interfere." I nodded. My voice barely worked, but I said yes. 2 hours later, I was meeting Gavin and Lila at the house. They were warm people in their mid-30s, with 2 small children who stayed behind at their rental. They stepped inside, their eyes widening at the old charm of the place. Lila ran a hand over the windowsill. Gavin admired the garden. They had that look of people who had been searching for something that finally felt right. Part of me wanted to cry watching their faces, but another part felt relieved. The house deserved a family who saw it as a home, not a bargaining chip. My grandmother would have liked them. We signed the preliminary agreement right there at my dining table. My signature shook, but my heart did not. After they left, I walked through each room slowly. I touched the edges of the door frames, the corners of the shelves, the familiar grooves beneath my fingertips. It was not just a house. It was memories, safety, childhood, escape, warmth. It was the only place that had ever felt like mine. I started in my grandmother's old bedroom. I opened her dresser drawers and carefully folded the few things I had kept. Scarves she used to wear on Sunday mornings. a little pin shaped like a daisy, a faded flannel shirt. I whispered thank you under my breath as I placed them gently in a box. Every room became its own farewell. In the hallway, I ran my hand along the wall where I had once traced my height as a child. In the living room, I touched the arm of the couch she had reupholstered in a fabric she chose, because she said it looked like sunshine on quiet days. In the kitchen, I paused with my fingers resting lightly on the counter where she used to. Knead dough. Her touch felt close, as if she had just stepped into the next room. When I opened the cabinet under the sink and saw the bowl catching that steady drip, I let out a breath that felt like releasing years of held tension. This house had held me through so much. It had absorbed my pain and my confusion and my exhaustion without asking for anything. It deserved peace. I grabbed a roll of tape and began sealing boxes. By noon, the movers arrived. They were 3 men from a local crew, friendly and efficient, the kind used to lifting heavy furniture through narrow hallways. I had booked them under a different name, using a prepaid card and a new post office box I had registered that morning. The less my parents could trace, the better. They asked where everything was going. I pointed to 2 piles. My belongings were marked with blue tape. My parents' belongings were marked with red. I watched them carry my grandmother's antique mirror, wrapped carefully in blankets, out the front door. Then came the boxes of my clothes, my documents, my books, everything moving out of the life I had known and into the new one waiting for me in Chesterfield County. The apartment I had quietly leased under my initials only, furnished enough for me to walk in and start over. For my parents' belongings, I had arranged a storage unit in their names, prepaid for 6 months. It was in a facility across town, where the manager, Sandra Linwood, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a gentle voice, had agreed to witness the transfer. I told her plainly that I needed everything documented. She nodded in understanding, saying she had seen her share of complicated family situations. When the movers loaded the last of the red-tagged boxes, I followed the truck to the storage facility. Sandra stood by the open unit with a clipboard. She checked each item off the list, verifying that it matched the inventory I had given her. She watched me sign, then she signed her name beneath mine. The metal door rolled down with a long, echoing clatter. She locked it. She handed me 2 keys. I placed one into an envelope with my parents' names written neatly on them. Front. The other I dropped into the bottom of my purse without looking at it. Back at the house, the movers finished loading the last of my things. My grandmother's house looks different now. Empty. Quiet. A little hollow, but not sad. More like it was exhaling. Like it had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for me to choose myself. I walked through one last time. The floors creaked under my steps. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows in soft amber patches. I paused at the kitchen threshold, trying slowly to take in the room that had been my safe place since childhood. A memory rose behind my ribs. My grandmother is standing at the stove, stirring soup with a wooden spoon, trying to smile at me. Her voice says gently, "Remember who you are, sweetheart. Remember what you deserve." I swallowed hard. I whispered it back. I know now. Outside, the moving truck rumbled as the crew closed the rear doors. The latch clicked loudly, final and solid. I stepped onto the walkway, the gravel crunching under my shoes. I looked up at the house one last time. The white paint my grandmother had insisted on maintaining herself, the porch where we used to sit with iced tea, the windows that had watched over me through every storm. My throat tightened. The breeze picked up and rustled the leaves in the yard, almost like a whispered blessing. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of everything lift in a way I had not expected. My hands were still. My heartbeat is steady. I stepped closer to the driveway, close enough that the setting sun painted a long shadow behind me. I closed my eyes, let the warmth touch my face, and said softly into the quiet air, "I did it, Grandma." The breeze moved again, gentle and warm. As if answering, I opened my eyes and watched the truck pull away. For a moment, I just stood there in the fading light, the rumble of the engine growing softer as it turned the corner and disappeared. The driveway felt strangely empty without the boxes, without my car, without any of the little signs that I lived there, and stirred the leaves along the curb. The house in front of me was quiet, blinds half closed, porch bare. It did not feel like mine anymore. And that was the point. I locked the front door for the last time, slid the key into a small envelope I had addressed earlier, and tucked it into my bag along with the others. One for the storage unit, one for my new townhouse in Chesterfield County, one for my post office box. My life is collected in small pieces of metal and paper. That night, in the new place, I lay in a bed that did not creak when I rolled over. The air smelled different there, like fresh paint and new carpet. There were no ghosts in the hallway, no memories pressed into the floorboards. The walls were bare, the kitchen cabinets empty except for the one box of dishes I had unpacked. So, I could drink coffee in the morning. It felt strange and a little lonely, but also like possibility. For a couple of days, I moved through a blur of logistics, finalizing the sale with Gavin and Lila, signing digital documents, setting up utilities in my own name at the new address, updating my information with the brokerage, changing my number and watching the old one disappear from the screen with a simple confirmation message. Each step felt a little like cutting a thread. My parents were on a beach in Maui while all of this unfolded. I knew because my mom posted photos on social media like clockwork. Her standing in front of a palm tree, drink in hand. My dad grinning beside a rental jeep, his arms sunburned. Captions about finally getting what they deserved after all these years. It was almost surreal to scroll through those images from the quiet of my new kitchen. I did not comment. I did not like any of the posts. I watched them the way you watch strangers you used to know. The closing on the house happened while they were snorkeling somewhere off the coast. The funds hit my account. My name shifted on paper from owner of a house to holder of a substantial balance and new property documents in Chesterfield County. Somewhere in the county records, the old deed now carried the names Gavin and Lila Porter instead of mine. I could have driven back by the house before my parents returned, but I did not. Coral sent me a message saying that the new couple had stopped by a few times, with a contractor to look at paint colors and lighting, and that they seemed lovely. I told her that made me feel better. And it did. I wanted the house to be happy. On the 10th day, late in the afternoon, I was standing at the small counter in my new kitchen, unpacking a box of glasses, when my phone vibrated. It was Coral. My stomach flipped even before I answered. "They are back," she said, without any preamble. Her voice was low, but I could hear the excitement under it. "Just pulled up a few minutes ago." I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes for a second, bracing myself. "Tell me," I said. She described it in the calm, matter-of-fact way only an older woman who has seen a lot of life can. Their sedan pulled into the driveway, a little dusty from the trip. The trunk popped open and my dad hauled out 2 oversized suitcases covered in resort stickers. My mom stepped out wearing a bright tropical shirt and a wide-brimmed hat. They were smiling big, the way people smile when they think they are stepping back into a comfortable story they understand. They waved at Coral across the street. She waved back, then quietly moved into the shade of her porch where she could see clearly, without being too obvious. My dad lugged the suitcases to the front steps while my mom chattered about the flight and the jet lag and how she could not wait to take a long, hot shower in her own bathroom. He set the bags down, reached into his pocket, and took out his key ring. I could see it in my mind. His fingers found the familiar brass key, the one I had seen him use hundreds of times. The way his shoulders probably relaxed in expectation as he slid it into the lock. Tio had told me they had changed the locks right after closing. I pictured the new key, the one in Gavin and Lila's hands now, trying smoothly. Coral said my dad twisted the old key and heard nothing. No click. No give, just resistance. At first, he thought he had grabbed the wrong one. He pulled the key out, squinted at it, and tried again. The same stubborn refusal. The door did not move. My mom asked what was taking so long. He told her to just give him a second, that the lock must be stiff from disuse. He tried again, this time harder. Still nothing. Coral said she could see my mom's expression change, even from across the street. Her smile faltered. She glanced around as if the neighbors might be watching. And of course, they were. People always notice when something does not go according to plan. After several more attempts, my dad jerked the key out and banged his fist lightly on the door. He called my name, the way he always had when he could not find something in the house. "Clara, open up," Keys are acting up. The only answer was the traffic down the block and the faint sound of a lawn mower in the next yard over. He called again, louder. Then he rang the doorbell 3 times. The chime sounded from inside, that same familiar ding I had heard my whole life, but no footsteps followed it. My mom's voice started to tilt. She asked if maybe I had gone out. My dad muttered that it did not matter, that it was still his house, that something must be wrong with the lock. He stepped back, looked at the windows, and tried to peer inside. What did they see, I wondered, gripping the phone tighter. Empty rooms, bare floors, the absence of their recliner, their clutter, their presence. The life they had assumed would always be there waiting for them. Gone. Coral said she watched my dad's shoulders tense, his whole body shifting from casual annoyance to something darker. He went around the side of the house, checking windows, testing one of the back doors. All of them held. He came back to the front, breathing harder now. My mom knocked hard, her palm flat against the wood. She started calling my name too, her voice edging into that dramatic tremor she used when she wanted an audience. "Clara, this is not funny. Open the door. We are exhausted." Nothing. Coral told me that at that point, another neighbor from farther up the street slowed down on his walk with his dog, watching. He did not recognize my parents and frowned as he saw them shaking them. Doorknob. From a distance, it looked exactly like what it was. 2 people trying to get into a house that no longer belonged to them. The neighbor called across the sidewalk, asking if everything was all right. My dad answered sharply that of course it was all right, and that this was his house. His tone did not reassure anyone. Within a few minutes, someone had called the police. Coral said she was not sure who, but she had her suspicions. The cul-de-sac was full of older folks who did not like disturbances. 2 patrol cars arrived, light bars flashing quietly. Officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, taking in the scene. By then, my mom was on the verge of tears. She was telling anyone who would listen that her daughter had locked them out, to be cruel, that she had mental problems, that this was all a misunderstanding. My dad kept waving his key in the air, insisting the system was wrong, that the locks had been changed without his permission. The officers asked for identification. They took my parents' names, then checked something on their in-car computers. It did not take long. The property records had been updated days ago. The house was listed under new owners, a different last name entirely. Coral said she saw my dad go very still when the officer told him that. At first, he argued that it could not be true, that there must be a mistake in the system. One of the officers said in a patient voice that the county records showed a sale, fully processed. He suggested my parents contact their attorney if they had questions. What he could not do, he explained, was let them force their way into a home that did not belong to them anymore. My mom started crying harder then, leaning against the porch column. She felt faint. My dad's face turned red in that way I knew so well, a slow, angry flush climbing up the sides of his neck. He kept saying that the house was supposed to be theirs, that family matters should not be decided on a computer screen. The officers stood their ground. One of them, a younger man with a calm voice, suggested they gather their suitcases and step off the property. He looked genuinely sorry, Coral said, but he did not waver. Somewhere in that chaotic moment, my mom noticed the envelope taped to the front door, just above the lock, where the sunlight hit it. It was the one I had left before I walked away, the one with their names written on it in my neatest handwriting. She snatched it off the door, tore it open, and pulled out the small storage unit key and the single folded sheet of paper. Coral could not hear what she read, but she saw my mom's face go from confusion to shock to fury in the span of a few seconds. Written in my steady, careful script were only a few words. A simple message that had come to me late at night when I could not sleep. Surprise, the Leech did this. My mom crumpled the paper in her fist. My dad grabbed it, smoothed it out enough to read, and then let out a sound Coral said she had never heard from him before. Something between a curse and a roar. He shouted my name at the closed door, then at the officers, then up at the sky, as if I might materialize from the clouds. But I was in my new kitchen, standing barefoot on a different tile floor, my back against a cabinet, listening to Coral describe every second. Eventually, the officers convinced my parents to step away from the door and gather their belongings. There was no crime here, they explained gently. Just a painful family dispute that had already been decided on paper. They suggested a hotel for the night. My dad, red-faced and shaking, pulled out his cell phone. He stabbed at the screen, calling the number he had always used to reach me. I had a sudden, vivid image of my own old phone ringing on some server somewhere, a sound I would never hear. Coral fell quiet for a moment on the line with me. Then she said that she watched him pull the phone away from his ear and stare at it like it had betrayed him. The recording on my old number told him the line had been disconnected. For a long moment after Coral said that, I just stood in my small kitchen, the phone warm against my ear, the silence between us settling like a heavy blanket. It was done. There was no way for them to reach me through the number they had always used. That thread had been cut. Coral asked if I was all right. I told her I was. It was not fully true, not fully false. It was something in between, like standing on new legs after years of walking with a limp. The next morning, I drove to my office at Blue Harbor Realty. My new phone buzzed with a notification from the security system at the building. When I walked inside, the receptionist looked rattled, her cheeks pink, her eyes wide. She whispered that my parents had been there. Again, loud this time. My stomach tightened. Before I could ask anything else, I heard my supervisor, Dana Whitford, call my name from the hallway. Her tone was clipped, that careful kind of tight that people use when they are managing irritation. They do not want to turn into anger. I followed her to her office. She closed the door firmly and asked me to sit. Dana explained in her steady voice that my parents had shown up 20 minutes earlier, shouting my name in the lobby, insisting they needed to speak to me. My dad had accused the receptionist of hiding me. My mom paced in circles, saying she was too ill to stand another minute and needed immediate attention. They had frightened 2 clients waiting for appointments. Someone had stepped back, thinking a fight was about to break out. Dana leaned forward and said she understood complicated family dynamics. She really did. But if they came back again, she would have to call the police to protect the staff and the business. She said she needed me to establish boundaries, or she could not promise my job would be safe. The words stung, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. I felt ashamed, even though I should not have been. I apologized. I told her I was handling it. She studied me for a moment, maybe trying to decide if she believed me. Finally, she nodded and said she hoped things would settle soon. When I left her office, my legs felt heavy. An hour later, while I was preparing a listing packet, my new inbox pinged. It was an email from a local deputy, Marcus Hale. He wrote that an officer from my neighborhood had forwarded a report about a disturbance at my former address. He said he understood that my family situation had escalated, and that if I wished, the sheriff's office could help document harassment for my protection. He asked me to let him know if I received unwanted contact. I stared at the message for a long time. It felt odd, having someone in law enforcement reach out for my sake. I was used to scrambling quietly on my own. Then the voicemail started. The first came from a number I recognized immediately. My dad's voice was sharp, too loud, breathing heavy between sentences. He said that I had embarrassed the family in front of the neighbors. He said that selling the house while they were out of the state was something only a heartless daughter would do. He said that I thought I was clever, but I was not. It was a long message, full of anger building on itself like a wave. I deleted it without finishing it. The second voicemail arrived only 5 minutes later. My mom this time, her tone soft and fragile, that practiced trembling voice she used whenever she wanted me to fold. She said that she was sick from the stress, that she felt faint, that she had been crying for hours. She said she could not believe I would abandon them after all they had done for me. I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen without seeing anything on it. The third message arrived that evening. This time her voice was different, sharp, full of accusation. She said I had destroyed the family and made my grandmother ashamed. She said I had taken everything from them. She said I had broken their hearts. The strangest thing was that I felt almost nothing. Maybe numbness. Maybe quiet resolve. Maybe both. Around 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed again, but this time it was a number I did not expect. Jeff Rowan, my cousin. He lived in Roanoke and had been close to my grandmother. We had not talked much since the funeral, but he had always been decent to me. When I answered, he asked if I had a few minutes. His voice sounded unsettled. He said he had heard from a relative that my parents were back from their trip and causing a scene. He said none of that surprised him. Then he hesitated. He told me that a few years before my grandmother passed, she had confided something to him in private. She had told him she worried my dad was digging around for her will. She said she thought he might be planning to pressure her into revising it. Jeff said that in 2018, he had overheard my dad asking a distant relative if they knew any lawyers who could revise estate paperwork discreetly. He had not thought it was serious at the time, but after hearing everything now, he felt I should know. I pressed a hand over my rib cage and closed my eyes. Each new piece felt like another puzzle tile sliding into place, revealing a picture that had been there all along. My grandmother's fear, my parents' behavior, the phone call I had overheard. Every instinct screams the same truth. This had been building for years. After I hung up with Jeff, I sat on the edge of my bed in the new townhouse, the room dim except for the soft lamp beside me. I could hear the faint hum of traffic through the open window, a reminder that the world outside was moving along fine. Inside me, something tightened again. Not fear this time, but that quiet steel that had been growing stronger each day. At 9:40 that night, another voicemail arrived. My dad did not sound angry anymore. His voice was flat, cold. He said there would be a conversation. He said tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, Maple Bridge Cafe. He said if I did not show up, I would regret it. Then the line went dead. I barely slept after that voicemail. Tomorrow at 10, Maple Bridge Cafe. Come or regret it. The words circled in my head like a slow echo. Instead of spiraling, I lay still in the dark of my townhouse, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car rolling by outside. I kept touching the edge of my nightstand where my grandmother's letter rested, under a lamp. Every part of me knew I had to go. Not for them, for myself. The morning light was soft and gray when I stood up, pulled my hair back, and put on the sweater I always reached for when I wanted to feel grounded. I double-checked the recording of the call on my phone. Just hearing the first few seconds sent a cold ripple through my chest, but also cleared my thoughts. Today, finally, it will all come out. Maple Bridge Cafe sat near the water, all big windows and the friendly smell of roasted coffee beans. I used to come here with clients, or alone on quiet afternoons. Today, it felt like a stage. I arrived a few minutes late on purpose, a small thing, but it steadied me. When I walked in, the bell over the door chimed, and warm air wrapped around me. My parents were already there in a corner booth. My dad sat like a block of stone, arms crossed, jaw tight. My mom clutched a tissue even before she saw me, her head tilted just enough to announce she was wounded. I slid into the seat across from them. No greeting, no smile, just stillness. My dad spoke first, telling me I was late. I said I was here now. My mom leaned in, her voice soft and trembling. She asked how I could abandon them. She said they had been humiliated in front of neighbors, in front of police. She claimed she hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, that her heart could barely take the stress. My dad cut in sharply, accusing me of sneaking behind their backs and selling the family home. He tossed around legal threats and words like betrayal, glaring at me as if trying to shame me into submission. I let them talk. The words rushed out of them so fast it was hard to tell which parts were rehearsed and which were instinct. People at nearby tables glanced over, then quickly looked away. The tension was impossible to miss. I said I'd listen if they could talk like adults. If not, I would leave. My dad scoffed, calling me dramatic. My mom dabbed her eyes, whispering that she didn't deserve a daughter who treated her this way. The waitress came and quietly set down a cup of black coffee for me. She didn't linger. Even she sensed the sharp air around our booth. For a moment, I felt that old pull in my chest, the one that used to drag me back into their orbit no matter how far I tried to step. It was the same feeling I had as a kid when they scolded me for wanting anything of my own, the same pressure that had dictated so many years of my life. But then I remembered their voices on that open call. My dad, my mom, the casual cruelty, the plotting. the certainty that I would fold. I held my phone in my hand and took a breath. I told them I had not thrown them into the street. Their belongings were safe in a storage unit under their names. Paid ahead for 6 months. They could retrieve everything whenever they wanted. I said I had given them options. They just didn't like any choice that required effort. My mom's crying grew louder, exaggerated, her voice shaking as she insisted I had sentenced them to a life of poverty. My dad leaned forward and said I had become cold, that I had forgotten where I came from, that I had spit in the face of the people who raised me. He repeated that they would sue, that they would tell everyone what kind of daughter I had become. And then I set my phone on the table. I told them it was time they listened too. Without waiting for their response, I tapped the recording. The speaker played the familiar background noise first, muffled laughter, rustling fabric. Then my dad's voice, unmistakable. "She is such a leech, draining us dry. She will sign whatever we put in front of her." My mom's voice followed, suggesting guilt tactics, doctor bills, stories to manipulate me. My dad again, talking about the house being their future, about pressuring me the moment they returned from Maui. Their faces changed instantly. My mom stopped crying mid-breath, like someone had turned off a switch. My dad went pale, then flushed deep red. I watched them, calm in a way I had never known around them. My dad barked out a question about how dare I record them. I reminded him he never hung up, that I had heard everything. That for the first time, their honesty had shown me exactly who they were. My mom jumped in, saying they didn't mean any of it. They were stressed. They were joking. They had been drinking. They were overwhelmed. The excuses tangled together, none of them even making sense. I told them my grandmother had seen this coming. She had gone to an attorney months before she passed to ensure the house would be protected from exactly this. I told them she had left it to me not as a burden, but as a shield. And I said I finally understood why. My mom's eyes filled with a new kind of tears, the hot, frustrated kind that comes when manipulation stops working. My dad clenched his jaw so tightly his teeth nearly clicked. I leaned in just enough so they could see I meant every word. I told them I was not responsible for the choices they had made. Not for their debts, not for their vacations, not for their inability to stand on their own. I reminded them that I had supported them for years, paid for things I couldn't even afford for myself, and they had still called me a leech. They had still planned to take the one thing in my life that was truly mine. My mom whispered that families are supposed to stick together. I said, sticking together does not mean being used. My dad muttered that I owed them. I said I owed them nothing. The air between us went completely still. I stood up, picked up my phone, and placed a few dollars on the table for the untouched coffee. My hands were steady, my breathing even. My mom reached toward me, but I stepped back. I told them I was done. I told them I was walking away because they had pushed me out a long time ago. All I had done now was finally step in the direction they had been forcing me. I turned to leave. That was when my dad slammed his fist on the table. The sound was loud enough to make utensils jump, and several customers gasp. His face twisted with anger he could no longer hide. He said in a low voice that I would pay for this. I did not flinch. I did not respond. I walked out of Maple Bridge Cafe without looking back. The cool air outside touched my face like a hand I trusted. I kept walking, each step unlocking something inside me that had been held shut for years. Behind me, I could still hear my dad's voice, muffled through the glass, calling my name. I kept going until it faded into nothing. By the time I reached my car, the worst of the shaking had passed. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching people move in and out of the cafe like it was any other Tuesday morning. For them, it was. For me, something huge had just ended, and something else, something quieter and stronger, was beginning. The drive back to Chesterfield County felt shorter than usual. Sunlight filtered through the windshield in gentle patches. Traffic, my mind felt strangely still, like a lake after a storm. No replay of every word. No desperate urge to fix what could not be fixed. Just a deep, tired calm. When I pulled into the parking lot of my townhouse complex, I sat for a moment and really looked at it. Rows of modest brick units, small trees planted along the walkways, a couple of kids riding bikes in circles on the sidewalk. It was not the grand old house my grandmother had left me, but it was mine now. Mine in a different way. No ghosts, No expectations. No one was waiting inside to tell me what I owed them. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. I kicked off my shoes by the door and walked through the small living room, my fingers brushing the back of the sofa I had chosen for comfort instead of endurance. The silence did not press on my chest the way it used to in my grandmother's house when my parents were there, full of judgment. It felt open, like I could breathe all the way down to my toes. That first week after the confrontation, I cried more than once. Not because I regretted what I had done, but because the release was so big, it had to go somewhere. I would wash dishes, and tears would slip down without warning. I would fold laundry and feel this grief for the family I had always wished I had, and finally accepted I never would. It was messy and human, and, in its own way, healing. A few days later, I kept an appointment I had made with a therapist. Her name was Dr. Lila Broxton. She had been recommended by a client who said she was good with complicated family stories. Her office was in a converted old house with soft colors on the walls and comfortable chairs that did not make you feel like you were in trouble. Simply across from her in that quiet room, I felt more exposed than I had at the cafe. With my parents, I could wear the armor I had built over decades. With Leela, there was no point in pretending. She asked me honestly. I told her about the college fund that disappeared, the paychecks that never made it into my own hands, the guilt that wrapped itself around every decision I tried to make for myself. I told her about the phone call my dad forgot to end, about being called a leech, about listening to them plan how to take my house as if I were a foolish stranger. Lila did not gasp or dramatize. She nodded, sometimes took notes, sometimes just held my gaze. She told me that what I had experienced had a name, that patterns of financial abuse and emotional manipulation often ran together. She said that growing up inside that kind of system can make a person doubt their own eyes, their own feelings, even their own right to exist, without apology. She explained that the way I had always rushed to smooth things over, to fix, to give, to bend, was not a personality flaw. It was a survival strategy. It had kept me as safe as I could be in a house where love came with barbed wire wrapped around it. That did something to me. Hearing it framed that way pulled a little of the shame out of my chest. We did not fix everything in one session, but we put a name to certain things. And once something has a name, it has less power. She said healing would not be a straight line. Some days I would feel free and strong. Other days I might want to crawl back into old habits. But every time I chose myself, I was rewriting the ending of my own story. Back at Blue Harbor Realty, things slowly began to shift too. The front desk staff told me that my parents had not returned after Dana, warned them about the police. That helped the knot in my stomach loosen each time I walked through the glass doors. I no longer scanned the lobby expecting them to be waiting. If I thought about it too long, I could feel a flicker of fear, but mostly I felt air where there used to be tightness. I threw myself into my work, not in the frantic way I used to when I was trying to earn approval or money for my parents' emergencies, but in a steady way that felt almost peaceful. I followed up with clients on time. I let myself enjoy helping people find homes without the bitter taste of knowing I would come back to one filled with tension. A month or so after the confrontation at the cafe, I landed a significant listing, a clean 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street that reminded me of the parts of my grandmother's neighborhood I had loved. The showing went well. The buyers made an offer above asking within a week. When the deal closed, Dana stopped by my desk with a small smile and said she had noticed the change in my focus. She said she was glad to have me fully present again. Walking back to my car that day with the contract folder in my hand, I felt something close to pride. Not the pride my parents used to demand and then snatch away, but a quiet inner sense that I had done something good for myself, for my future. It felt new. On a warm Saturday afternoon, as the air began to smell like cut grass and sun-warmed pavement, I heard a knock on my townhouse door. When I opened it, Coral stood there, holding a small brown box wrapped with twine. She wore one of her light cotton blouses, and that easy, kind smile. She said she was in the area visiting a niece and thought she would drop this off. She said she had been meaning to give it to me for a while. Inside, she explained, was something too hard between me and my parents. We sat inside the box was a folded piece of fabric and a sealed envelope with my name, written in that same, slightly shaky handwriting I'd come to know too well on other letters. My eyes stung already. The fabric was an apron my grandmother had always worn when baking. Faded little flowers scattered over soft cotton. I brought it to my face, and there it was. That faint mix of flour and vanilla that belonged to her and no one else. It hit me so hard, my breath caught. I opened the envelope carefully. The letter inside was short, like the one she had left in the keepsake box at the house. But she wrote that families could bless or families could break, and sometimes they did both. She wrote that she had seen the way my parents took and then called it love. She said she could not change them, but she could give me tools to stand up for myself. She told me that if I was reading this, I had already done something hard, something she knew would cost me emotionally, maybe socially, but that she believed in me. She wrote that I deserved a life where I was not always apologizing, just for being there. A life with room for joy. I set the letter down and wiped my eyes. Coral reached across the table and squeezed my hand. There were no big speeches between us, just the quiet understanding of two women who knew something about loss and survival. Later that evening, after Coral left, I stepped out into the small patch of yard that came with the townhouse. It was not much, just a rectangle of earth along the back fence, but it was enough. I had picked up a few lavender seedlings from a nursery a week before, without really planning when I would plant them. I stood there now with the little plants in their plastic cups, a trowel, and a bag of soil, and it suddenly felt like the right time. I knelt, dug my hands into the dirt, and made small spaces for each plant. The smell of earth rose up, rich and familiar. Lavender has always been my grandmother's favorite. She said it calmed the mind, softened the air, and made a house feel like a refuge. As I pressed the roots into the soil and patted it down around them, I felt a thread stretching from that old house in Lakeshore to this new little strip of land in Chesterfield County. I watered the seedlings gently, watching the droplets sink in, darkening the dirt. The sun was low, painting the sky in shades of soft orange and pink. A light breeze moved through the fence, brushing my hair back from my face. Standing up, wiping my hands on my jeans, I looked at those small plants and thought about how fragile they seemed, and yet how deep their roots would one day go if I tended them. It felt like a picture of my own life, just starting to grow in a new place. For the first time in a very long time, I felt not just relieved to be away from my parents, but genuinely hopeful about what might come next. I stood there in the yard for a while, watching the last light slip behind the trees, before finally heading inside. That evening drifted into night, and then into morning. And before I fully realized it, seasons began turning one after another. Life has a quiet way of moving forward, even when you are not paying attention. A full year passed. Sometimes I think about that morning at Maple Bridge Cafe, the look on my dad's face when the recording played, the way my mom's tears stopped on command. Those images used to keep me awake at night. Now they feel like scenes from a movie I watched long ago, sharp in memory but stripped of their sting. Pain dulls when you stop feeding it. My parents ended up renting a little room above a tire shop on the south side of Petersburg. Coral heard it from a friend of a friend. She said they still complained about everything: the heat, the noise, the cost of groceries, the betrayal of an ungrateful daughter. But they did not drive to Richmond. They did not show up at Blue Harbor Realty. They did not call the police, or neighbors, or cousins. They stayed where they were because they finally knew crossing my boundaries had consequences they could not twist their way out of anymore. The legal matters wrapped up quietly. Deputy Marcus kept his word and helped document everything. The sheriff's office contacted me once to confirm a final detail about the property transfer and then closed the file. No one pursued anything further. My parents had threatened court, but without a shred of ownership or evidence, there was nothing to stand on. They had built their whole plan on entitlement, and entitlement was not a legal claim. Every so often I would get a message from a distant relative saying my parents were still telling people I had thrown them into the street. Some believed them, most did not. It no longer mattered to me either way. Let people think what they want. I was done living my life to manage the stories others told. My townhouse in Chesterfield County slowly became a home. The lavender I planted grew thicker, greener, and brighter as months passed. I rearranged rooms without needing anyone's approval. I cooked dinner without bracing for footsteps behind me. I left a book open on the sofa and came back to find it in the same place. These small things, so ordinary to others, were signs of freedom to me. Work continued to flourish. Dana offered me a partnership track by late spring. I laughed when she told me, and then felt tears prick at my eyes, because I realized how long it had been since someone believed in me without asking for something in return. I took on more clients, taught a workshop at the community center about first-time home buying, protection, and found myself enjoying the kind of confidence that grows from the inside, instead of being borrowed from fear. Therapy with Leela helped too. Week by week, she walked me through the places in my mind where old patterns still lived. She reminded me when I slipped into guilt, when I tried to make myself small for the comfort of others. She said healing was not about erasing the past, but about choosing what you do. Carried forward. I carried my grandmother's words. I carried the strength that came from finally choosing myself. Everything else I learned to let go. On the anniversary of the day I left the old house, Coral stopped by unexpectedly again. She brought lemonade in a glass jar and 2 slices of lemon cake wrapped in foil. We sat on my small porch and watched a breeze ripple over the lavender beds. She told me she could almost see Maggie standing there, hands on her hips, proud of how much had changed. I looked at the sky. Warm gold light settled across the yard. I could almost feel my grandmother's presence in it. Not as a ghost, but as a kind of memory that steadied the ground beneath me. I thought of all the years I had lived believing I was a burden, and how wrong that belief had been. I thought of the open call, the moment everything snapped into clarity, and how that pain had become the doorway to something better. When Coral left, I walked out to the yard again and touched one of the lavender stalks. The color was richer now, the scent stronger. Life had a way of blooming even after long neglect. I whispered softly to the air around me that I hoped my grandmother could see me now. Not because I needed her approval, but because I wanted her to know her love had not been wasted. It had grown roots inside me. It had held me up when everything else fell apart. I stood there for a long time, letting the evening settle, letting peace find me where chaos used to sit. And then, quietly, almost like an exhale, the truth rose in me with a strength that felt earned. I was never a leech. I was just the only one brave enough to finally stand up for my own life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.